explain who are the world's top military spenders and what does the latest SIPRI report say. In 2020, the United States military spending was 3.7% of its GDP, while the corresponding number for China and India were 1.7% and 2.9% respectively. In its reports on trend in global military expenditure in 2020, the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute has found that the world's top military spenders, the US, China and India, saw their military spending go up compared to 2019 even during a pandemic year. Last year, the US spent a total of 778 billion. China spent 252 billion and India's military expenditure was 72.9 billion. While India's spending since 2009 grew by 2.1%. The increase for China was more moderate at 1.9%. The US saw 4.4% growth over its 2019 expenditure. In total, the global military expenditure rose to 1981 billion last year, an increase of 2.6% in real terms from 2019, the report said. It mentioned that 2.6% increase in world military spending came in a year when the global GDP shrank by 4.4%. Largely due to economic impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic. So what SIPRI does? The Sweden-based SIPRI is an independent international institute dedicated to research into conflict, armaments, arms control and disarmament. It was established on the basis of a decision by the Swedish parliament and receives a substantial part of its funding in the form of annual grant from the Swedish government. Established in 1966, SIPRI provides data analysis and recommendations based on open sources to policymakers, researchers, media, and interested public. So what the 2020 report says, in 2020, the United States military spending was 3.7% of its GDP, while the corresponding numbers for China and India were 1.7% and 2.9% respectively. From 2011 to 2020, American military expenditure dropped by 10%, but China saw a 76% growth, while India's military spending grew by 34%. SIPRI said the military spending in Asia and Oceania was 2.5% higher in 2020 than in 2019 and 47% higher than in 2011, continuing an uninterrupted upward trend since at least 1989, and attributed the rise primarily to increase in spending by China and India, which together accounted for 62% of total military expenditure in the region in 2020. The other top spenders including Russia with 61.7 billion, the UK at 59.2 billion, Saudi Arabia at 57.5 billion, followed by Germany and France at just under 53 billion each. Releasing the latest, SIPRI said that the total global military expenditure rose to 1981 billion last year, an increase of 2.6% in real terms from 2019, and the five biggest spenders in 2020, which together accounted for 62% of global military expenditure. As a consequence of the reduction in global GDP last year, it said that military spending as a share of GDP, the military burden reached a global average of 2.4% in 2020, up from 2.2% in 2019, which it said was the biggest year-on-year rise in the military burden since the global financial economic crisis in 2009. While military spending did rise globally, some countries explicitly reallocated part of their planned military spending to pandemic response, such as Chile and South Korea, and many others including Brazil and Russia spent considerably less than the initial military budgets for 2020, the report said. We can say with some certainty that the pandemic did not have a significant impact on global military spending in 2020, said Dr. Diego Lopez da Silva, researcher with the SIPRI Arms and Military Expenditure Program. It remains to be seen whether countries will remain this level of military spending through a second year of the pandemic. What SIPRI has said about India in the past. Earlier in March, a SIPRI report found that India's arms imports came down by a third between 2011-15 and 2016-20, at a time when the government has been trying to reduce the import dependence when it comes to defense platforms and weapons. However, India remained the second highest importer, only behind Saudi Arabia. The top five global arms exporters were the US, Russia, France, Germany and China in 2016-20. In the study, SIPRI stated arms imports by India decreased by 33% between 2011 2011-15 and 2016-20. Russia was the most affected supplier, although India's imports of US arms also fell by 46%. The report attributed the fall not to the government's push to make India self-reliant in defense spending, but to factors including reducing the dependence on Russian arms and the complex procurement process. The drop in Indian arms import seems to have been mainly due to complex procurement process combined with an attempt to reduce its dependence on Russian arms. Alexander Cumming, researcher with the SIPRI Arms and Military Expenditure Program, said Russia substantially increased its arms transport to China, Algeria, and Egypt between 2011-15 and 2016-20. But this did not offset the large drops in its arms export to India. The report stated that international transfer of major arms stayed at the same level between 2011-15 2016-20, as a substantial increase in transfer by three top 5 arms exporters, the US, France, and Germany, were largely offset by declining Russian and Chinese arms export. The report said Middle Eastern arms imports grew by 25% during the period and was driven by Saudi Arabia, with a 61% increase, and Egypt and Qatar, which saw a jump of 136% and 361% respectively. Before that, in 2019 yearbook, SIPRI found that the worldwide total of nuclear warheads had decreased since 2018, but countries are modernizing their nuclear weapons, and said that 9 nuclear-armed countries had a total of some 13,865 nuclear weapons at the start of 2019, which is a decrease of 600 nuclear weapons from 14,465 at the start of 2018. The report separately counted deployed warheads placed on missiles or located on bases with operational forces, and other warheads, stored or reserve warheads, and retired warheads waiting dismantlement. For India, it gave a figure of 130 to 140 other warheads 2019, the same as in 2018. Thank you.